Good morning. So I stole a couple pictures here, kind of to describe my thinking on why I chose the topic of Chinese multilateral environmental engagement. So on one hand, we have a lot of new technologies coming out of China, and it's a major exporter of green technologies. And we also face a significant energy challenge. So that's the picture over there. Then you have significant environmental degradation. Picture up there, you have growing CO2 emissions, but then you have strong, proud China that has a national identity that it's trying to upkeep, and they won't accept a challenge in that. So the context for this paper, which is multilateral environmental engagement with Chinese characteristics, taking an economic nationalism perspective. So since liberal market reforms in the late 1970s, expanding the economy has become a vital component of the Chinese Communist Party's capacity to maintain domestic social order and stability. China's national economic fortunes have also increasingly been linked with the global economic system, and rapid economic development has had the overall effect of improving human security, which has delivered widespread prosperity and social mobility to many, which has also lifted millions out of poverty. More paradoxically, Chinese authorities have protected national sovereignty and have often been reluctant to cooperate on many global affairs. And the environment is an example of this, certainly, with international climate change and ozone depletion. And China has been reluctant to participate due to the fear of significant compliance costs, which will also challenge the CCP's ability to be the social provider. China has notably feared external regulations as well as scrutiny. This is evident most recently in Copenhagen, will be evident again in Cancun. More recently, however, so in recent years, declaratory policies and behavior has changed, with China becoming an increasingly an active participant in multilateral environmentalism. So we saw at Copenhagen, while China was not necessarily prepared to take stringent action to mitigate its greenhouse gas emissions, it certainly was prepared to be a lot more visible and active. So the purpose of this paper is to understand why sovereign-centric China has become more open to multilateral environmental engagement, certainly related to global environmental issues. Serving as China's most visible forms of engagement are China's participation in climate change and ozone layer depletion regimes, and their associated environmental redistributive funding mechanisms. These are the Global Environment Facility, as well as the Multilateral Fund for Ozone Depletion. China's interactions with both funding instruments are examined as foreign policy case studies here to comprehend China's environmental cooperation. And so the pressing questions I look at in this paper are listed above. Why does Chinese foreign policy engage in environmental multilateralism? And in what way has Chinese foreign policy reframed global environmental issues, and specifically as regards climate change and ozone depletion? So a closer look at China's cooperation on climate change and ozone depletion through the GEF, so Global Environment Facility, and Multilateral Fund, MLF, reveals the depth, motives, and consistency for how and why China, as a developing country which seeks to maintain social stability and to curb poverty, has co-opted international environmental engagement into its reform era priorities, which support national economic expansion and strengthening nation-state sovereignty. China's participation and foreign policy interventions on climate change and ozone has also been operationalized as a means to augment the party's control and to support social stability and human security. Now, I guess my paper overall is a bit of a critique on China, because I certainly think that it can do a lot more, but at the same time, I guess it's a critique of everyone, all international actors, because certainly there's a lot of potential and opportunities which have already been discussed. but certainly are not being used at the international level. So, as I'll mention just now, but I'll touch on later. Ozone depletion, it's been revealed that it's been reversed. So, international agreements have been successful in reversing ozone depletion, and the MLF has contributed significantly towards it. But it's not being used as a model to follow necessarily for climate change, and so that's where international actors are failing. And we can't just blame China for not following through. So, threefold argument guiding this paper. Foreign policy is influenced by contemporary economic nationalism, which incorporates environmental multilateralism as a means to achieve core national goals. China's securitization of ecological degradation enhances overall human security in China. And increasing international cooperation on the environment reinforces social stability and the CCP's authority. And so 5 reasons why understanding Chinese environmental engagements is important. So as discussed, China is the largest emitter of greenhouse gases, well ahead of schedule. It also is the largest producer of, or was the largest producer of ozone depleting substances. China is de facto leader for developing states, certainly in international environmental negotiations, and this is often through the Group of 77. Chinese environmental commitments help to catalyze developed and developing states and actions uptake. China's commitments determine the efficacy and the tools of international actors and regimes have to engage with developing states to limit ecological degradation. And China's cooperation across the regimes enlightens us the consistency of the state's priorities, as well as the state's ability to co-opt particular issues like climate change and ozone depletion to serve national goals. My approach is to use economic nationalism in order to be able to bridge how sovereign-centric China also is able to legitimize participating multilaterally. So in the late 1970s, reform-oriented messages like to be a great power is to be a player in international society were increasingly expounded in support of poverty eradication, wealth creation, and China's overall national development. Concurrently, international economic joining has also revived memories of national humiliations, which has encouraged nationalist sentiment in recent years. In contrast, globalization encourages international interdependence. Multilateral relations are considered as contributing to the decline or possibly the end of the nation state. And certainly Chinese authorities don't want this. So economic nationalism at bottom has at times been interpreted as opposed to liberalism, certainly economic liberalism. However, contemporarily defined, economic nationalism is considered as a distinctive component of nationalism and supports core values, which are based upon encouraging national unity, autonomy, and augmentation of national power. Notably, economic nationalism presumes the relevance and importance of sovereign nation states, but provides them a space to pursue national goals and to fortify national identity in an international arena. So for China, for me, I conceive of economic nationalism as bridging the gap between maintaining core sovereignty aims, which can be seen in climate negotiations, for instance, but also participating a little more concretely in negotiations and being a lot more visible. So China's modernizing international relations and human security implications, and I do think that human security is conceived in China at the state level, which has been discussed already. But so human security, as has been discussed, emerged in the first part of the 1990s as a distinctive field of study. It put forth a human-centered approach to considering security, and here human security focuses on safeguarding the individual from critical and pervasive threats, and has emerged as a central concept, especially across the UN system. Traditionally, conceptions of security have predominantly been concerned with protecting nation-state interests and viewed security as a component of foreign and defense policy, and considered security as an important influence on military interventions. However, amidst rising globalization, and in China with 1/5 of the world's population, of which a sizable number are impoverished and under growing threat of or from ecological degradation, non-military and non-traditional threats like climate change and ozone depletion are challenging China's preconceptions for maintaining national security. And as a result, these have encouraged increased multilateralism in China's foreign relations. Although not declaratory policy in China, a human-centered approach to security has been integrated as a pathway to sustaining social stability and CCCP political legitimacy. For this paper in particular, and focusing on China, human security is conceived as protecting individuals from serious threats to life, health, and personal well-being, and also in a way that provides them with freedoms for long-term fulfillment. Through their global nature and scale, climate change and ozone depletion pose national security challenges for the party in terms of maintaining economic growth, which helps to alleviate poverty, which is the main concern, but also for sustaining social stability. As we know, China is home to a great many of the world's poor. I have the figure of 18%, and as many as 135 million live on less than $1 per day. So increasingly, in China, conceiving of environmental issues as threats to national security has resonated among economic and foreign policy elites. And a lot of these elites are the same people in the NDRC and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Because it fears that the economic burdens of ecological mitigation would be too great, China has opposed taking action until it reached middle income status, certainly in the climate regime. This was pegged at $5,000 on a per capita basis of GDP. However, this argument has become less relevant now that it is estimated that if real GDP growth were to account for environmental pollution and destruction, GDP would decline between 15 and 25%. So notably, the poor and China's food production and economic zone coastal areas stand to be hardest hit by ecological damage on the scale of global climate and ozone destruction. So through applying an economic nationalism lens to China's foreign policy engagement with the UNFCCC and its funding mechanism, the GEF, as well as the Montreal Protocol and its funding mechanism, the MLF, we're able to understand a little better why China's international relations, which in human security context, can legitimize international participation. So, two case studies now. The first one is the Global Environment Facility. So, when the climate regime formed in 1992, the GEF had formed a year before, and it became the primary financial transfer instrument for allowing developing states to have the opportunity to mitigate and adapt to climate change. While GEF financing is not explicitly intended to generate financial profits, it has primarily been directed towards low-hanging fruits and developing profit-making ventures. And in China, it is certainly taking advantage of this because while the GEF is a very visible method of participation, not necessarily a whole lot is achieved through Chinese participation therein. And in many cases, when China receives funding to implement a project through the GEF, project success is measured according to the likelihood of being able to implement a project effectively. So that's to take the money and see that it is placed on the ground, that it's not all siphoned off all the funds to other places, but also success is measured according to the amount of money that can be co-financed, so the amount of additional funds that can be leveraged from the original grants. And certainly, this is the case for China's thinking on this. So China, more than any other developing state, has acquired significant economic benefits, which augment the party's ability to maintain social stability and reduce poverty through augmenting human security. So in China, international environmental cooperation is mainly aimed to develop environmental industries. We've seen the wind industry and the solar industry discussed already, but also to acquire foreign aid and the transfer of clean technologies. So the transfer of clean technologies, you've seen the wind industry go from foreign-owned to domestic-owned. So national identity as well. There's also a matter of dignity in China, which furthers China's goal to promote a much stronger cooperative image as an environmental steward. And as promoting China's image as a cooperator rather than an obstructionist, China is able to increase its capacity to receive investment as it improves its image as a location, which helps to augment human security, prosperity, and poverty alleviation through economic growth. And so here's a chart. Since 1991, the GEF has allocated nearly $9 billion in funding. Nearly $39 billion has been leveraged in additional co-financing. So on top of that, seed funding. And China has received the greatest amount of funding from the GEF, $750 million, with nearly another $7 billion in co-financing. And 60% of this money has gone towards climate change projects, which tend to elicit co-financing a lot more easily and which are approved a lot more easily in China. Part of the reason for this is that these are low-hanging fruit projects. They're projects that, for instance, will mitigate against ozone-depleting substances, which are really easily mitigated because some industries in China have continued to produce these substances in order to gain the funding to mitigate them. So it's kind of circular here. So the multilateral fund, which is the second case, this is for ozone depletion. So early on, when ozone depletion was identified as a global threat, China's participation in mitigating this problem was identified as vital. And the MLF was the first financial mechanism determined to help developing states phase out ozone depleting substances and to be born from an international treaty. Chinese delegates proposed the establishment of an international fund because they found that while developed states had a smaller population, they were consuming most ozone-depleting substances, and whereas developing states had a much larger population, they were producing most of these substances for export. And so this begs the question of who is really at fault for what China is producing it to make money, not because they want to be producing necessarily environmental damaging products. So China has played a pivotal leadership role amongst developing states, notably through the G77, negotiating the terms of cooperation with the ozone regime, as well as negotiating levels of assistance from the MLF, which are contingent upon continuous evidence for the production of ODS, so ozone-depleting substances. You can see here the bottom line is how much money China originally received through the multilateral fund, and then the top line is that money has been leveraged from those initial seed funds. The numbers are a lot smaller than the Global Environment Facility, but this probably should have been a good example for the international community on how to engage China, because it was very active in supporting this. What has resulted in from ozone depletion is we now have a report a couple of weeks ago, or a month or two ago, where ozone-depleting substances are in decline. So this has been a very successful model for reducing ozone damage, but it's not been followed in the climate regime. So for China, joining the MLF accomplished numerous important national objectives, including displaying national concern for a global environmental problem, showing that China could be a cooperative international actor, therefore helping it to retain a leading voice in the developing world. This has helped China keep up with international technology advancements, provided China access to financial and technical assistance, and has fostered significant growing export market in China. And as well, in China, its success in reversing the production of ozone-depleting substances has been recognized by the World Bank, the Ozone Secretariat, and even U.S. negotiators, which call on China as a really helpful partner here. So, conclusions and implications. So to answer the questions posed at the outset, why does China foreign policy engage in environmental multilateralism, and in what way does Chinese foreign policy, or what way has Chinese foreign policy been reframed to incorporate global environmental issues like climate and ozone. So indeed, Chinese multilateralism is guided according to an economic nationalist discourse. Though China will negotiate, make declarations, and even sign agreements, like as we saw in Copenhagen, the continuity of China's pragmatic interest to support social stability and improve individuals' well-being helps to ensure that mitigating environmental damage does not become a core national interest. In spite of considering climate change and ozone depletion as security threats in and of themselves, China pragmatically engages for specific economic priorities and poverty reduction purposes while retaining long-standing drive to protect its sovereignty. And we saw this, most recently, there's a good example of this in Copenhagen with the 40 to 45% goal, which I certainly believe is just a business as usual policy to mitigate energy intensity, because the IEA already found that that goal would have been reached anyways without much effort on the part of China. And so I think a lot of other explanation has been given for the possible significance of climate damage in China. So I think I'll leave it at that.